Hi, welcome everyone to the 2021 CRES BA Symposium. I'm Jacqueline Gaines. I'm the Student Affairs Administrator at the Center for the Study of Race, Politics, and Culture. The CSRPC administers the Critical Race and Ethnic Studies major and minor programs. We're so glad that you're here to join us this afternoon as we celebrate the graduating CRES students and acknowledge all of the hard work that they've put in this year to their BA thesis or capstone project. I also want to thank Professor Kara Keeling, the CRES Director of Undergraduate Studies, and the CRES Preceptor Nova Smith for their support, advice, encouragement, and dedication that they've shown to our students through a very challenging year. Thank you also to Professor C. Riley Snorton, Tracy Matthews, Marilyn Willis, and Tiara Kilpatrick at the CSRPC. So just a couple logistical notes. Each student who is presenting tonight will have about 10 minutes total to share a bit about their project and to take some questions. We'll leave the chat feature on, so feel free to drop some notes of support and encouragement in there throughout the program. If you'd like to ask a question about the project, you can either use the Q&A feature or click raise your hand, and I will allow you to turn on your video or audio, whichever you'd like, and to ask the question live. So hopefully that all works. Just a quick reminder to our students, this is not an evaluation, this is a celebration. You've done the hard work for your project, so now is just the time for you to tell us a little bit more about it and for us to all celebrate as a group. Okay, so with that, I will turn it over to our host and discussant for the evening, the CRES Preceptor, Nova Smith.
Hello, everybody. Welcome again, and a hearty congratulations to our BA theses and project students here at CRES for a job well done, not only in our specific work, but in your time at UChicago overall. You all have faced an incredible amount of adversity in getting these projects done. For those of you, your loved ones who don't know, it is nearly a year-long endeavor, longer for some students. A project that for us begins in the fall quarter of their fourth year, although for many students it begins in the spring of their third year, where we kind of workshop and work on ideas, solidifying the basis for our either written thesis papers or our projects. And in addition to kind of being by default a kind of the pandemic CRES class, you all are the first year ever in CRES history to have projects. So that's both a freeing thing, but it was also a bit of you're also somewhat the guinea pigs as we worked out the kinks of what our projects would look like and how you would bring them to fruition. We continued that work into winter quarter, and that was really more so self-directed. I will say that there were some wonderful benefits that came from our being remote, but there were also some times we didn't get, say, the access to spend some time in the library, which we otherwise might have. And we had to kind of reconfigure what our group work would be like for a class that's meant to be very intimate and salon-like. We had to kind of work with breakout rooms, and you guys were wonderful and were troopers through a lot of unusual circumstances. Some due to your individual projects, but again, some just due to the nature of the world. I really appreciated how hard you all worked. I actually expected there to be more kind of slacking in efforts, and I really didn't see that because of the passion you all have for your subject matters, that there is a sense that you would be undaunted in producing the work, and you have been. So again, hearty congratulations. You're at the finish line and beyond now. And now I'm very excited to just see and have everyone else in your life see what it is that you do and who you are as scholars, as thinkers, as you Chicagoans, and as beautiful citizens of the world. All right, well, I think without further ado, we are a couple minutes early, but let's keep that train going. Maybe we'll continue to be. I want to introduce our first speaker. She was actually the first person of this cohort that I met a year ago. So I'm very excited to introduce Diana Kalima, speaking on her project titled Mute, an exploration of the discursive space within Black youth communities when popular musicians perpetuate harm.
Hi. um, oh, are we sharing screens? No, I could just talk about it. Either works. Nova?
Hi, I think if you need
One
to share
second.
screen,
Sorry, I can.
Jacqueline.
Yep, I'm working on it. 1 second. Sorry.
So it should just be a moment and you will be able to.
Cool.
Okay, you should be able to now.
All right, cool. Awesome. Okay. Nova already said the title, so yeah. Also shout out to my advisor, Jessica Baker. She was great, and Nova was great in keeping me sane throughout this whole process. So yeah, I chose to do a project and I wrote a screenplay, and it follows a 17-year-old girl named Ayana as she witnesses and hears various instances of intimate partner violence during the summer before her senior year of high school. Other major characters include Zaya, who's a 21-year-old woman that Ayana frequently sees on the bus during their commutes to wherever during the summer. And the bus becomes this public space turned private, as many conversations about her relationship with abusive boyfriend Xavier abound. And it suspends this gap between public perception and her unknowable lived experience. Amina is the girlfriend of one of Ayana's beloved artists, and also had to include Twitter somewhere in there. So there's a page called Cancel of the Day, which, much like the real world, serves as a cultural network by revealing some of the latent values of virtual community networks. So this dynamic and contentious relationship between larger social and political forces and Black cultural priorities fundamentally shape Black popular music. According to Trisha Rose, Black music is a cultural form that attempts to negotiate the experiences of marginalization. However, this form of mediation, I found it to render itself incomplete, since it offers the ability to add, subtract, and otherwise manipulate one's perception of reality. Ayana doesn't genuinely know her favorite artist, but she treats his music as well as other artists as a blueprint, so to speak, and kind of like a safety net as she navigates adolescence. Alan Wade and Linda Coates made this developed and analyzed the four discursive operations of language, which is shown on the right. And their study argues that the problem of violence is inextricably linked to problems of representation and misrepresentation. And artists and their listeners who form parasocial bonds with them can then weaponize these operations of language. Going on, domestic violence is often framed in isolated ways that pathologize and shame Black women. So there's a need to use language and the manifestations of language to reveal violence, clarify offenders' responsibility, elucidate and honor victims' responses, and contest the blaming and pathologizing of victims as a whole. So throughout the play, I used this annotation. And essentially the protagonist's mother, she was a clinical psychologist and couples therapist prior to her passing. And similar to her daughter, she's an audiophile. And she left behind four things that Ayana clings to dearly: a record player, a pair of green headphones, an extensive vinyl collection, and a plethora of annotated journals. And in these journals, her mother would frequently focus on intra-community rhetoric and analyze patterns of recognition and misrecognition throughout lyrics, interviews, and other modes of communication between artists and fans. Notably, the primary obstacle that her mother faced was not being able to hear the complete side of many women's experiences in intimate partner violence cases, especially with popular artists. Male artists were often able to use their words, both spoken and sung, to fashion a mediated image that would satiate their fans. And a component that occurs frequently in the screenplay is this glitching, and her headphones are constantly cutting out or shorting. She needs to replace the needle on her record player, but things keep stopping her from being able to do that. And thus there's this kind of blending of diegetic and non-diegetic for Ayana. And this glitching, I used it as an attempt to mediate, remediate, and demediate what she was encountering throughout the screenplay. And last but not least, just major takeaways that I wanted people to think about. I didn't come up with all these answers, but such is research. As I was researching for this project, the term accountability arose often. And while the internet creates an abundant space for discourse, that discourse isn't necessarily or automatically more useful or substantive. So questions that came up were, do we in the sense of Black youth community, even have a framework for accountability? Does that framework reject our tendencies to center the power and domination over others? Additionally, there's also this glaring power dynamic that complicates our ability to meaningfully hold popular Black artists accountable. Simply, like, few of us have literal access to them, despite how often we wear our headphones. We're not actually in community with most of the artists that we listen to. However, the messaging that primarily seeks to denigrate, shame, and dispose of people is all fun and games until we're ingesting it and employing it in our daily lives. Essentially, I wanted to challenge readers to critically consider the media that we ingest, and how does that media affect not only how we think of ourselves, but also how we think and interact with others. So the screenplay stemmed from my concern of the people who live in households with other people who do find these artists and this messaging particularly insightful. And I was also hoping through this project to highlight the subversive ways that intimate partner violence manifests, and more importantly, it's normalized as well. And in this context, it escalates to the disciplining, restricting, and weaponization of Black women's desires and pleasures. And that is all. Thank you for listening.
Thank you so much. Do we have questions from the group while people are deciding whether to chat or raise a hand, etc.? I think we've discussed this, but I'm still very curious. What was it about the screenplay format that particularly spoke to you to discuss these wonderful issues about violence and accountability and fandom, etc.?
Thank you for the comments. I'm seeing them now. And to answer Nova's question, I knew at the outset that I wanted to do a project, and I thought of different formats initially, but I think I landed on the screenplay primarily because it provided, in an ideal world, had I had time to shoot it, it would have provided a visual component to the oral component as well. And just how media throughout the years has done so much to kind of cement certain ideals and latent values. And it's my hope that it can also reverse those as well. And also, it was just really fun. It was something I'd never done, so I wanted to try it.
Well, beautiful challenge that you have met. I'll just kind of allude to it wasn't so much a question as a comment, but I think there's a question there. Does this work have an afterlife? Will it be produced, or is this its final moment, or is there something you're planning to do with it further?
I would look into it. I did talk to my advisor and she was like, you should do something with it. So maybe once I graduate and I have a little bit more time, I can look into like actually seeing it on a screen. But yeah, I think that would be really cool to do.
You mean you can't do it all in one moment? No. Once you breathe. And we have a wonderful comment from your colleague, Micah. Do you have a favorite image or favorite set pieces that you imagined writing this screenplay?
Favorite image. And
I'll open that up to say if there are artists that you particularly were being impacted by.
Oh, yeah, of course. The two main artists that kind of I researched the most were Tina Turner and Rihanna. And I chose aspects of their both the court cases and just like how they lived life post assaults, and imbued those into both Zaya and Amina, the two other major characters that weren't Ayana. And as far as my favorite, I'm not sure. Probably the way in which I turned the bus into made the bus a public space into a private space, and then the studio a private space into a public space as the artist was working on music and releasing it. And those conversations would be given to their fans.
Well, thank you so much for all of your hard work and for your presentation. As we transition to our next speaker, I'll just leave with the note that when somebody's advisor says they nailed it and they have a little fire emoji, that's always a beautiful thing. So congratulations.
Thank you.
All right. Next, we have Lily Lee, and she will be speaking to us today about her work on education for liberation, challenging the hegemonic structure of the university.
Oh, hello. Let me share my screen. So yeah, my project, or I guess my thesis, is on student organizing and ethnic studies at University of Chicago. And the title is Education for Liberation, Challenging the Hegemonic Structure of the University. And so the primary research question that I was interested in was, why do student organizers at U Chicago specifically demand a department from an abolitionist approach? So in general, I guess coming into like the brainstorming process for the project or the thesis, I was already kind of thinking about student organizing and how to sort of think through student organizing on this campus specifically and how to contextualize it within like the sort of broader scholarship and literature on higher education. So I'm situating this research within sort of the larger ongoing conversation around ethnic studies and departmentalizing ethnic studies, or making mandatory ethnic studies curricula in the US. And so I guess the demand for ethnic studies at University of Chicago is within that same conversation. And specifically here, the campaign is situated under an organization called Chicago United. And the campaign itself is called Ethnic Studies Now. And the graphic is just like the way that the campaign summarizes its demands on its social media. But the campaign itself has been going on for about 4 years now. And the demand for a department and stuff has been sort of in the process of, I guess, campaigning for a department. I think the vision for the department has changed a lot. And that's kind of like the change or the shift that I was interested in as I was interviewing people. So as I guess before going into the thesis itself, I also wanted to make sure that I highlight the way that ESN kind of often uplifts, that it's situated in the lineage of ethnic studies, student organizing, starting from the 60s. And specifically, often they quote the Third World Liberation Front and the Lomba Zapata Third College Demands. And so the vision here that I kind of like interviewed the participants about is not necessarily like completely new or anything, but there's like prior history and generations of student organizers that these students are building on. So for my literature review, the three things, I guess, that I kind of focused on were the idea of neoliberal hegemony as articulated by Daniel Saunders in his article on the effect of neoliberal hegemony on higher education. And here I just use neoliberal hegemony as a term to contextualize the Chicago principles at University of Chicago as a sort of, I guess, destabilizing how it's often perceived to be politically neutral stance or an apolitical stance, and really highlighting the effect of neoliberalism on individualizing and commodifying the idea of education, and how that has an effect on erasing the idea of dissent among students. The term racial colonial genocide I borrowed from Dylan Rodriguez's paper on Asian American studies. And this is also a term that I use to highlight specifically the role of racial capitalism and its effect on higher education and the way that university has built its capital, and the way that racialization works at the University of Chicago and how this has significance for student of color organizing specifically. And then of course, the idea of resistance again and student organizing that is in the lineage of Third World Liberation Front and 60s student organizing movements. So I conducted several interviews with students who were in the Ethnic Studies Now campaign. And the primary themes that came up were the idea of community. And this is, they often sort of mention that coming into the space of student organizing at Chicago was very much so first driven by the need for a community on campus. And so a lot of like the interpersonal relational work helped facilitate the entry into student organizing spaces. And also the sort of idea that the community that existed among student organizers felt different from the community that was facilitated by the structures that existed at the university. So I think a lot of the feeling words that came up were often like more genuine or more, I guess, just like genuine or like feeling of warmth and like actual closeness and ability and accountability versus community spaces, for example, in housing and like those kind of structures often felt too surface level or superficial. And then the idea of power, where through student organizing, a lot of the participants mentioned that they changed their perception and relationship to power, where there was first of all, a recognition of the university as a power structure, but also the power as vested in the collective of student organizing and the individual agency and power that students have to make change, and then challenge the notion of that neoliberal hegemony that I mentioned earlier. And yeah, this is also tying into what I mentioned earlier, where community and power then were seen as sort of overlapping concepts. And I thought that this was kind of what the primary takeaway from my, I guess, interview process, that students ultimately arrived at the conclusion that community is power and power is in community. And so the way that they had sort of thought of learning amongst each other and with each other was antithetical to the structure, the educational structure at the university, that felt more isolating or alienating. And so I guess by the end of my project, I kind of arrived at this conclusion that an abolitionist approach to education is necessary in order to think of more anti-oppressive alternatives, I guess, to what currently exists. But yes, that's all I have.
Great, thank you so much, Lily. We're opening up to questions and comments. As any come in, I will begin. Obviously, you know, there's a lot of discussion, as your research highlights, with these issues on our campus. Given your final conclusion about an abolitionist approach, were you in a position of maybe control over the destiny of this on our campus? How would you envision it?
I think, well, there's multiple, I guess, layers to this, because I think also during the interview process, I think a lot of the students mentioned that, you know, the process of fighting for department in and of itself already has like sort of potential of, you know, pushing against what currently exists, or like pushing against the limits of how we imagine education to be. But I think again, the idea that it has to be rooted in community or like in interpersonal relationships first and foremost, and also the notion of agency or power, those are kind of like the starting points for an abolitionist vision of education. But yeah, I think that the constant resistance and like building power and stuff all go into that as well.
Nice. Really quickly, just a housekeeping question. Who is your advisor?
Yeah, my advisor was Professor Bell, Joyce Bell, in sociology. Very grateful to her as well for advising.
Thank you. And let's see, we have a question from Riley Snorton. Would you tell us a bit about about how abolition would change how we think about educational labor?
Yeah, for sure. I think, I guess this is more so a personal opinion, but I feel like abolition, or at least like the work of like ethnic studies now organizers and like labor organizing, right, is very closely tied, because it's also looking at, you know, the hierarchy of like labor, right, at the university and stuff. So in a space where learning is grounded in community, and it's more so grounded in like a horizontal leadership structure, I guess, where it wasn't just like one person who's an expert in the classroom, right, who's like teaching, versus like a space where is actually knowledge is co-created or shared. And so that, I think that also has kind of like different implications for, yeah, like what would labor, quote unquote, look like in an educational setting, because it's then like every person has something to bring in, right? Or like, I think the way student organizing, also the learning space within student organizing, right, is very horizontal. So in that sense, I think the idea of labor is more so like distributed horizontally.
Great. Sorry, I was frozen there for a second. Not sure if you all were. Thank you so much. And Riley Sorton appreciates your commentary as well. If there are questions for any of our presenters that go beyond the initial Q&A, hold on to them and maybe you can throw them in the chat, or at the end, there might be some time. But right now, we are going to move on to our next presenter. Thank you again for such really meaningful, important work, Lily. And now we are going to hear from Sydney D. Jackson, and she will be presenting on dance as a multifaceted historical medium amidst fights for Black humanity/equity.
Hi, can you all hear me? Can someone give me like a thumbs up here? Okay, awesome. Thank you very much. Sorry, I'm just waiting. My sister's getting me her dog out of my room. Thank you everyone so much for being here. I'll just give a few short words before I share my screen. My name is Sydney Jackson. I'm the 4th year anthropology and CRES double major, and I'm actually graduating in the summer of this year. So I am continuing my research for my thesis and working on that through July of this summer. So the title of my project actually is Twerking as and for Protest, How Instagram Videos Trivialize Power, Blackness, and Joy as Resistance. So I can go ahead and share my screen right now. Let me just. All right, so let me present. Okay. So first, I will just play a short part of the 2 clips that I'm considering as pieces of media in my research, because I think that it just gives some necessary context. So the one is a video that a lot of people have seen before called, it went viral with the meme called Lose Your Job. So that is one video. And the second video that I'm considering or kind of using as a model for my inquiry is the following. I don't know if the sound is working.
Can you get this audio?
I'm trying to pull it up right now. It's just Instagram keeps giving me the no sound sign. I'm sorry. There is audio on this. I'm not sure if it's just my computer. Wow. The audio in the background are protesters chanting Black Lives Matter, as Yves, the individual pictured, is dancing. So if that helps give you a sense of kind of what's going on, there's Confederate flags in the back, there's people chanting Black Lives Matter. So for my research, the 4 keywords that I'm really considering are the erotic, political autonomy, the virtual as a space and a place, and Black McGee's, Black marginalized gendered individuals. I'm thinking not just about these 2 videos, but about the virtual afterlives and the conversations that they created as far as situating conversations about how Black people respond to trauma and various types of like stressful situations. Let me go ahead and go to the next tab. I'm seeking in this research to construct a critical lens for consuming media that takes these two videos and thinks not just about how we personally react when we first watch them, but about the political implications of the videos that we share online, how we consume them, how we react to them, and the types of conversations and comments that are left on them. Largely, my research is influenced by my prior interest, which was taking up dance and thinking about how, sorry, let me pull this up on the other page right here. Thinking about how various dance movements such as hip movements and various dance practices such as costuming and adorning oneself can be used as means of social and economic mobility. I take up dance in the instances of these two videos because my research was largely influenced by 2020 and everything that came to be last year. And so that's why I particularly felt inclined to move my research in the direction of thinking about not just using dance as a means for economic mobility or personal change, but how it can be used as a medium within our communities to create change for ourselves. So finally, I will share some of my last commentary. In my inquiry, this summer, I plan to facilitate different gatherings aimed at bringing people together to dance, particularly BIPOC and MAGee individuals. I'm currently exploring ethnographic film in 2 courses that I'm in, as well as other ethnographic types of research modes for capturing these workshops. I want them to be a sort of praxis for my research inquiry as far as considering how Black people can come together presently in response to everything that 2020 and 2021 has been as a means for creating healing and change for ourselves. My intention is to continue my research into grad school studies. I'm really interested at thinking about this through the lens of performance studies. And I hope that this work will not just be something that I relegate to writing papers and whatnot, but I really foresee it being the type of work that brings a lot of people into conversations. That's all I have to share for right now. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Sydney. I'm excited to see that you are continuing to think about the afterlife of your own project. I always am interested in that, so I'm excited to hear. Questions as we have those rolling through. Right now, I am, as they continue to roll in, wondering about, so you've kind of spoken about for a good while the erotics and what that means to dance, and also other elements. I'm curious about humor, though, if that has come up for you, and the humor of, or how rather humor informs virality and how it maybe works with or undercuts the politics, and particularly thinking about the always fraught notion of laughing with versus laughing at, the laughed atness of Black humor or Black virality. I don't know, it's kind of a amorphous question, but is there anything you've thought about that?
Yeah, so that sort of gets into the critical lens that my research ultimately proposes. What I'm considering in that is understanding that in both of the videos that I showed, which showed 2 people named Yves and Janiqua, there are underlying very social issues as well as like internalized race issues at play that are shaping these. Nonetheless, when they're being shared online, the majority of the commentary, well, I did some of my research was just actually keeping track of the comments that were left on these videos when they were posted in different places. And a lot of times the comments were laughing face emojis, fire emojis, stuff of those like. So I find I kind of take that and I consider how unfortunately that the existence of these videos in viral spaces, I conclude kind of does work to undermine some of the, like, I would say, motivating factors at play when they were in the actual instances that have been filmed and then shared and viralized.
Thank you. Just quick note, you're still screen sharing.
Oh, sorry. I don't know how to stop. How do I, there? Do I just?
Jacqueline help? And note, a comment from OK Boomer, very excited commenter we have here, noting that your focus on the afterlife reception is brilliant. So do take that with you as you move forward with the project. And thank you so much, Sydney. And we will now move forward with our next presenter, Micah Clark Moody. And Michael will be speaking about student understandings, whiteness, policing, and anti-racist teaching.
Hi, everyone. I'm Micah. I'm going to share my screen real quick. Okay, so I think Nova just introduced my project, but my project was titled Student Understandings. I'm very thankful to my advisor and also to Nova for all of their support throughout this process. It's been really, thank you, it's been really helpful. So my question was, what do white students in an upper class urban school district believe about the carceral system? And how did curriculum in Crow and encountering the movement of Black lives impact their understanding? This question was especially informed by the movement for Black lives in 2020, and especially the prevalence of like white response and attention, yard sides in segregated white neighborhoods, and really what impact this kind of new discourse and attention had in this segregated and privileged community. So the setting itself was a place called Highland. All names are pseudonyms, but Highland, which is a small segregated suburb in the Midwestern city, Central City. Highland itself is 96% white and about 2% Black, which is not consistent with the larger city, which is about 58% white and 28% Black. I maintained the kind of Black-white dichotomy and color line throughout this project because participants also used this language, and but I also want to acknowledge that the experiences of Indigenous people, of non-Black people of color are present in Central City, are important in Central City, but weren't the focus of this particular project. Highland is also very economically privileged. The median income is about double that of Central City at $101,000. And that's quadruple the neighboring town, which has a median income of $28,000. So I recruited for the study in a 12th grade English class where the teacher has chosen to add the new Jim Crow to the curriculum in a very consciously like anti-racist or move attempting to be anti-racist. So I showed up at all of the classes, invited people to participate, and 6 volunteered. 2 of the people, Fran and Olivia, just submitted essays that they had written about the new Jim Crow. And then 4 people submitted their essays and also participated in semi-structured 45 minutes interviews. And the way I structured this is I read their essays responding to the new Jim Crow, and then constructed an interview protocol that picked up on themes like acknowledgement of white privilege and attention to criminalization of drug use. And then some divergences, like one student wrote in their essay that any challenge to the carceral system, well, they wrote criminal justice system, had to be colorblind, and other students really disagreed. So I also introduced that in the interview to see where students diverged in their understandings. This is located at a lot of intersections in literature. It's in the discourse analysis piece, it's most situated in whiteness studies and identification of whiteness as an identity that is operating and exercising power in discourse and society overall. It also draws on theories studying the carceral state and the emergence of the carceral state in both social thought and in actual detention and creation of unfreedom. And then there was aspects of contemporary political attitudes also, as I looked at like large scale change in attitudes towards the movement for Black lives and other related political issues. So I missed a slide. Perfect. So my findings were somewhat surprised to me. So students all paid attention to the news in the sense that they watched videos that were published over the summer of police violence against Black people. And 2 of the 4 students who participated in interviews attended a protest for the Black Lives Matter movement. And so students expressed doubt about the goodness, especially the law-abiding of individual police officers, but there was not a critical turn to ask, is policing generating safety? Is policing necessary? Like broader structural questions weren't prompted by those individual moments of doubting a single police officer. Teaching the new Jim Crow disrupted their understanding of the law as like stable and neutral, but that did not extend to a kind of critical questioning of the very categories of like crime, violent, or even like morally bad. Students, instead of wondering if defining something as criminal was equating it with bad was even possible, students were assuming that any action that wasn't bad but was defined as a crime simply needed to be redefined. So for example, drug possession needed to be redefined as not a crime because they didn't view it as morally bad. That didn't, to them, indict the system at large. And crucially, there was a continued mootness to the racialized nature of the control of the carceral system, and also the economic nature of the control of the carceral system, and the historical grounding in enslavement and racial oppression throughout history. Like those themes in Michelle Alexander's book, The New Jim Crow, were not picked up and were not repeated in interviews, which kind of brings me to the last finding, which is that while students aren't completely color evasive, they are able to identify themselves as white and able to identify that they hold some privilege from that whiteness. It's isolated to an individual understanding and does not extend to a systemic analysis. So they struggled to identify racial segregation, and they defended their local police department and either struggled to or evaded more systemic questions that were prompted by the granular doubts that they had after reading The New Jim Crow and watching media about the movement for Black lives. Brings me to my conclusions, which really, really heavily draw on the work of other people. I think, like Diana said, such as research. But the first one is that anti-racist teaching, it can't only present information, but has to engage a systemic location. So ask, like, not only, does segregation exist, but what does this neighborhood look like? And similar questions. And then there are also some limitations to this study. It did not address the experiences of Black students in the district or other students of color. It omitted white students who didn't support the movement for Black lives because they didn't volunteer to talk with me. And it also largely omitted class analysis. I was really focused on this particular group of people, young white students who expressed support for the movement of Black lives and have changed, and it came up in the study, have changed their opinion recently. And so next questions about teaching strategies, the relationships between their life experiences, these views, and especially gender and understandings of punishment are, there are many more places for questions like this to go. Stop sharing. Does anyone have questions?
Thank you very much. Okay, I will get things started. So you spoke about the fact that for students, they were somewhat evasive for, I don't know if I paused. Did you hear me? I'm freezing. Okay. That they're somewhat color evasive regarding their own, I guess, institutions or things that they interact with.
Mhm.
If you can maybe, I'm assuming, but outline what those may be, and kind of where their, I don't want to say fault lines, blind spots, evasive places were.
Yeah, sure. First, I should say I use the word color evasive in keeping with the new discret analysis of how the metaphor of blindness is can be ableist, but B also limits the agency of individuals. So if the word evasive sounds surprising or strange, that's where it's coming from. And you can mentally sub the term color blindness if that's useful. So I think it's so the students I talked with were seniors in high school, and all but one had lived in this neighborhood their entire lives. So it was everything from the police in their neighborhood, students. So one thing that came up frequently is students would describe things they've heard about in Central City as, in conjunction with the movement for Black Lives, as racist against Black people, and believed that the Central City police were problematic, but then would say things like, well, but the police in Highland are paid more, so they must be more professional, or, well, the police in Highland have better training, they must be different. And not recognizing that, first, the police station is literally on the border between Highland and the poorer neighborhood next to it. And there are as many police, the number of police stops in Highland are exactly in line with the national numbers. Like, there are police there, and they are police and they participate in this. They're just the police. They're not special. And so I think defensiveness and kind of built-in stories about how their community is different or better was really involved. I think the work of naming all the ways that Highland expresses support for the movement for Black Lives without a critical analysis of why that only emerged this year was also really prevalent. One question I asked was, I remember this one, back when I was in high school. How has this changed since you've been in high school? And students really emphasized people have yard signs now, people have gone to marches, and emphasized like how much people have changed without kind of paying attention to the fact that, conversations about racial inequality are not new at all. And especially the movement for Black Lives, I mean, this is not new. Like, it goes back to 2013 when the hashtag originated. And so they just didn't see that having shock or feeling like this was new information is just reflective of an amount of privilege and segregation and out of touchness with kind of a national discourse about racial oppression that they just haven't encountered because they live in a segregated place and didn't need to. So I think those are two, and their school is segregated and students didn't know how to talk about that. Two students recognized that, but like the word redlining just wasn't known. They just didn't have the historical tools either to like start talking about it.
Fascinating work. You've got some wonderful comments here, kind of supporting your, the difficulty of shedding light on whiteness amongst white audiences, the notions of privilege and evasion and erasure, and the care with which you are thinking about language and how you're framing these situations. It's very instructive and useful. So I think we are very appreciative of all the really significant work you're doing and how it might impact carceral situations moving forward. Thank you so much, Micah.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Oh, of course. Now we will be moving on to Leanna Fu. Her project, I Uprooted Return.
Yes, hello. I'm gonna share my screen 1 second. Okay. Okay, I'm sorry. I'm trying to get this to fit. Okay. So my project for CRES was also joint with creative writing, and it's a creative piece entirely. I created a zine, and it was advised by Professor Riley Snorton. I'm very grateful because he came on very late into the process for me because of some like issues with other advisors, but yeah, very grateful for him. So I began writing this piece as kind of an excavation into my past self and Chinese American history. I was really stuck on the idea of return, but not in like a physical sense to any like diasporic homeland or country, but in a more abstract sense to childhood and the play and freedom and power that can come from that. Um, I was also really thinking about this through the lens of shame. I think that's a really strong like emotion in this piece. Shame for my lack of language ability, queerness, and just like general like Chineseness, because I spent so long trying to fix these parts of myself. So in this piece, I try to honor those feelings and the feelings I felt as a child. And I realized that I no longer have to prove anything to anyone, not to any nation, to other people, or to any institution. So you could describe this essay as a construction of selfhood, the collage of decisions I'm making for myself, hate mail to everyone and everything that ever made me feel ashamed. Um, and some questions I was thinking about while I was working on this is like, what can I do with the past and what can I do with what I've been given? So this essay is really a journey in realizing my own power and agency beyond capitalist, punitive, and unimaginative definitions imposed by nations, such as like the use of official documentation and interrogation questions, and also definitions imposed by institutions like religion and school. So this quote is from an excerpt from my piece, which is a letter that I wrote to my future self. And in it, I consider the quote by Ursula K. Le Guin, true journey is return. Um, I really believe it, not return to any physical place, no homeland or country, but a feeling, a state of being in the world, a return to childhood. I suppose I'm trying to do that now by writing this to my future self. So this is kind of word cloud, I guess, of what the major themes of this piece is, if I could sum it up. I'll also say that for me, like during my research process, I found out that my great grandpa was came through Angel Island, which is an immigration station in California, and I'm still in the process of getting his case file from those national archives. But that was really like important for me as part of my personal history. But yeah, I was like heavily inspired by that, and also just like these themes of like childhood and language and queerness and time. So some influential texts for me, the creative ones were short stories and lyric essays, more experimental pieces that kind of combine poetry and prose and also images. So in my piece, I also use those different mediums. Dictate by Teresa Ha-Kang Cha was a really big inspiration for me in that she really uses multiple forms and plays of language. It really challenges like meaning making through her work. Some theoretical texts were essays by Dylan Rodriguez about Asian American studies in connection to the prison industrial complex, as well as Sadia Hartman and her use of archival practices. Some historical works were just like I did research on the poetry that was engraved into the walls of Angel Island. And I also used texts such as the Hart-Celler Immigration Act of 1965 and the Chinese Exclusion Act of 1882. So my methodology, my piece includes lyric essay fragments that provide a space for personal reflection. I have letters that I wrote to myself, one I wrote when I was 13 and one that I wrote more recently. I have the original poems in Chinese and their translations that were engraved into Angel Island. I have the immigration questions that were asked at Angel Island, but also Ellis Island, and also the current immigration questions. I have some personal notes and reflections. I have my childhood drawings, and I have those acts, like I mentioned before. And I decided to do a zine format for this because of the history of the zine format rooted in political resistance. And also I think it really suited my medium as well. So these are just some screenshots of the different pages in my piece. On the left, it's one of the poems written at Angel Island. And then on the right is the letter that I wrote to myself when I was 13 years old. And then this is also another page. The layout of this is the same as it is in my thesis, but basically on the left, you see a photograph of the Chinese characters that were carved into Angel Island. And then on the bottom of that, you can see the translation. And on the right is an image that I drew when I was probably 5 or 6 years old. And my interpretation of it is that I think it was of Hong Kong. And then this is an erasure poem that I did of the Immigration Act of 1965. So I kind of wrote it out so it's like easier to read, and I think I will just read it. So for purpose and present, mend migration nation sows, special numb, aliens issued other, laws are shit, destroy nations, I am, I have, I profess, exceptional ability in the sciences or the arts that will substantially benefit prospectively the national economy, cultural interests, or welfare of the United States. Still, not enough, but I do not care. I exist, not for country. I uprooted, return. And these are also just the immigration questions that kind of span from the ones that are asked currently, and then the ones that were asked at Ellis Island, and the ones asked at Angel Island. The main difference to point out here is just the number of questions that would be asked. So it was really striking to me that at Angel Island, there would be usually an average of 200 to 1,000 questions asked in these interviews, as opposed to that Ellis Island, usually around like 29, 30 questions, and currently around 10 to 20 questions in these interviews. So some main questions I'll end this presentation with, or kind of what I was thinking about when I was writing this, and then also kind of what I want to pose to my audience and just like things to reflect on is, what parts of my identity rooted in violence, shame, and envy can I reclaim for myself? What does it mean to return, and what do I gain by recreating and reflecting on the past? And when we are defined by papers and documents, labels and profitability, i.e. the state, how do we recreate ourselves? What would it mean to view ourselves and our ancestors as not merely victims, but as agents of power and change? And then also, what would it mean then to see yourself as an agent of power in your own circumstances and to be free of that ancestral weight? So yeah, thank you. This is the link to my zine. I can also like post it in the chat, but yeah.
Thanks so much. It's gonna be exciting to actually see it in its kind of formatting home. Having completed the project now, what are your thoughts about return? I know that's a difficult thing to parse because it is so broad, but I think maybe there were some different thoughts in the beginning versus during the process of writing than during kind of a culmination.
Yeah, so I think I really started this like questioning my own idea of like what it means to return to myself. Because I think for a long time I thought it would be like, a physical type of return to a diasporic homeland, or like some way I could return by like learning a language, or just like feeling more like I could be like in my culture or accepted in that way. But began to realize in this process, I think it was very healing for me to be able to express myself in this way and reflect. And I slowly, recognized return for myself as something that was like nothing that anything or anyone can give me, but something I have to give myself. And I think that was really important in the sense that like it's a personal journey, and it's like not something that, it's not about acceptance or belonging per se, but it's like something that takes like learning, unlearning, and learning. Just like what I realized in childhood is also important for me today, and like those reflections are really still resonant for me. And so I think like I've also come to the conclusion, right, that it's like having to having like research all this like history, specifically Chinese American history. It has been a history of exclusion and alienation. It's like also, why would I want acceptance or inclusion by those same institutions, knowing that history? And so I think it has been really helpful and healing for me to like do that reflection and come to these realizations.
And I hope you're kind of seeing many of the comments noting the power, I think, and force of your work. And you did already post the link, right? And so your request for it, but I think it's already up if people scroll up a little bit. And just, we do need to move in, but I have one quick question. Since you've now created an online space for it, did you have kind of an imagined reader or an imagined encounter that somebody would have with this project, beyond the fact that obviously it's for a certain BA requirement?
Yeah, I think, that was a question I started off with kind of unsure about. I think honestly, it's first and foremost for myself. I, wanted this to be something that I could look back on and feel like proud of. But I think also, of course, it is out in the world and people are looking at it. And I think that it's important for like everyone, in the sense that like, I think that question that I have at the end about, your own power and realizing that own power. Not that I think writing or art can do that in itself, but I think like at least it provides that space for reflection and a critical reflection, and a like actual time to like slow down and think, amidst like really busy schedules and just like capitalist society. So I think like it's for anyone really, just like who has experienced shame and who wants to like just reflect on that and not like have that shame like and that ancestral history be something that weighs you down, but instead like empowers you.
I think you've touched on quite a lot when you deal with the vein of shame and return and language. So thank you so much for kind of bringing this to life for us, for yourself. And again, if we have any questions toward the end, now we're actually going to go move on to your colleague, Alia Muhammad, mapping our social safety net, testimony from the heroes on the front lines.
Hello, I'm Alia. Let me just quickly share my screen. Get this one. Okay, my big project was called Mapping the Social Safety Net, Testimony from the Heroes on the Front Line. This is a research project that I did conducting interviews within the Cleveland area, which is where I'm located right now during the pandemic. So yeah, the subject of the paper is just kind of an analysis, I guess, of the current social safety net in the Cleveland area. And it illuminates the like resources for support as far as just basic, needs for survival. Just kind of what there is. Cleveland is a particularly disadvantaged city, so the sort of resources that are provided through the different organizations in the area are really vital for people's survival. And then the testimony that I'm taking through interviews of people who work within the system, I analyzed through the lens of like Black feminism, because all of the women that I interviewed were Black women. Many of the people who they were providing are Black women or are in some ways related and intertwined through the complexity of race and gender through their position like in the city. So the main objective is to just outline and review what resources are available and how many people are utilizing them just based on the overall makeup of the city. And then the second is to kind of say, okay, we know who's using them, what resources they are. Is this enough? Are we really providing the resources and the care that we need right now to support all the individuals in our community who are currently struggling? And if we aren't, what happens to those people? What happens when you fall through the cracks and you're not being supported by the social safety net? So my primary methodology through conducting these interviews was to do Zoom meetings. And each of their aliases of the people that I interviewed were hidden. One interview, which is actually one that I did with my sister, who is someone who works within the childcare industry, and I guess she works for a private organization that provides support to children in the Cleveland public school system and charter school system. So we conducted that interview in person, but all the rest of them were done remotely. When talking about what kind of care I'm looking at, I'm sort of using a broader definition of care, not necessarily just in healthcare, mental health or behavioral health services, but just anything that is meant to improve or stabilize the well-being of someone physically, emotionally, mentally, spiritually, socially. And all of the people who I interviewed and who participate in this are a part of either publicly funded or privately funded organizations. So these are not like, like a church or something like that, which is, funded primarily by the people, the community. But part of the things that a lot of my interviewees told me about was that the church, the community, the neighborhood often have to come in and fill in the blanks when the sort of resources that they provide aren't able to come up to the level they need to be, or like they aren't able to provide to all the people that they have. So when thinking about care, you have to consider all of the areas where people are receiving this kind of care. So when looking at the kind of Black feminist lens and feminist analysis that I wanted to use, it's primarily just looking at the intersectionality of identities between people who identify as Black, people who identify as women, or are just not men. And so because their identities interlock to create two different and related forms of marginalization, it's really important to take that into account when thinking about the specific needs that they have and how they differ from other people who don't have that intersectionality of just kind of discrimination and difficulty in our society. So when we're just thinking about the historical background of what it means to be Black in America, to be a woman in America, we know that the Black life has always been regarded as just a vehicle for increased profit for a capitalistic society. And if Black people and Black bodies are not providing profit, are not providing some sort of capital or financial incentive, they're not regarded as valuable. They're demeaned, beaten, enslaved children were not even fed a proper diet until they reached 10 years old, when they were permitted to work in fields, because they were not directly providing some sort of financial incentive to the slave master to provide for them until they were capable of working. Same as Black mothers who were, basically brutalized throughout the entire period of their pregnancies and then forced to immediately begin work on the field, like in the fields, so that they could, again, increase the productivity for the slave master. And that continues post-slavery abolishment, where the same type of work is being done just for extremely low wages. But when talking about the social safety net in the United States, it's extremely lacking until we have our New Deal from FDR, which created significant reforms to both the social welfare system and labor. But these benefits were primarily allocated just for white people. And Black people were intentionally cut out from receiving the benefits of this in order to appease conservative lawmakers of the era. And so in 1964, when the Civil Rights Act was signed, it was the first time really that, universal suffrage for Black people, true reforms and ability to interact with the resources that they were provided as citizens. It was the first time those things were really allocated, and very quickly, eliminated due to the fact that Ronald Reagan and other conservative politicians like Nixon demonized Black people who, took advantage of these resources and accused them of stealing from the state, which were brought on levels and levels of austerity over time, culminating in the Personal Responsibility and Work Opportunity Act, which basically forced Black women to, no matter what their circumstance, to work in order to provide public assistance, and also decrease the amount of assistance they were given. So it did nothing to actually lift Black people out of poverty, and did everything to cause destruction essentially to families and make it so the Black mothers couldn't be mothers, they had to be workers. And this is on top of the difficulties caused by the AIDS epidemic and the drug epidemic that disproportionately impacted the Black community. But when we're talking about Cleveland, and we're thinking of the modern day, this is a city with a really large Black population. This is a city that's highly segregated, with different neighborhoods holding primarily white populations or some mixed ones, but Black communities in particular suffer from extremely high rates of poverty. 32% of people in the city are living in poverty, and the amount of homeless people is constantly rising, up to way over 40,000 people are at risk of or suffering from homelessness in the city, which is probably impacted significantly by how the minimum wage in Ohio is so low that for many people it's not a wage that can really provide them housing and the food resources they need, which just shows the significant gap and the socioeconomic disparities between people in the city. So just to give an overlay of some of the programs that we're looking at, to start, the Ohio Bridges program. This is a program that is for youth who have aged out of foster care, specifically within the brackets of ages 18 and 20. And this program provides for them things like housing, employment, it helps connect them with those things, and healthcare. But it's very important to think about the fact that this resource is only allocated to students for the youth 2 years after. But yeah, Help Me Grow is a program that is for pregnant women and their children who are suffering or experiencing developmental delays. So it's again not open to everyone. It's only up for the first 3 years of life, and it's only for a specific group of women, despite the fact that many women actually need support with their children. Wendy's Wonderful Kids is a program that helps connect foster children to adoptive families, and the Ohio Youth Centered Permanency Roundtables are programs that provide caseworkers to help find emancipation and kind of legal rights for kids who have been in the foster system for a long time and now need to become independent adults. I realize that I probably am faster, but Aretha was the first woman that I interviewed for, when collecting information. She has 20 years of experience in the field. She's worked as a director, a supervisor, and a case manager, and she works directly with the Ohio Governor, Mike DeWine, in providing resources and programs for foster youth. Nina, she's worked for the elderly for over a decade now, and she acts as a liaison for elderly people who don't have family and supports who can assist them and programs. Kira is the alias I chose for my sister. She's a behavioral counselor and tutor for the ABLE program for serving schools in Northeast Ohio. She works specifically with predominantly Black children who are suffering from difficult or struggling in school academically, and also have behavioral health difficulties and problems. So just kind of looking at what I found from my research and through the interviews, especially regarding young adults, youth are at greater risk in Cleveland than any other demographic, including veterans and people like specifically who are dealing with mental illnesses. They're greater at risk for homelessness, and many of them have very little to no support when aging out of the foster care program, because programs like Bridges are so specific. Like if you are not looking for work, if you are not, in school, you can't take advantage of those resources. So it really makes it so difficult for them. And with elders, many of them are isolated and are unable to access the resources that are available for them because they either don't have experience with technology or just don't have the tools that they need to connect themselves. And so many of them have to experience isolation, especially during the COVID-19 pandemic. And then for children, I think that reading this quote is really important. It starts all the way back between families and communities that don't have the resources and the support the child needs. Child takes those resources to build the skills, and then they function optimally, right? So if the families are not able to provide what the children need, it's really seen and when you look at their ability to function in a school system and beyond, because this housing insecurity, food insecurity, and lack of access to behavioral counseling services all contributes to their inability to really thrive in their current environment. So looking at what are some of the better ways to go forward, there needs to be a more empathetic and personally driven approach to dealing with individuals who are struggling, rather than just allowing them to be quotas or statistics or clients. Aretha specifically talked about the ways that she's training her current case managers to really be open to understanding the values of the people that they're serving, rather than trying to impose their own values onto them. So these are a list of essentially the primary takeaways for what really needs to happen. Every individual, regardless of employment status, needs to be guaranteed unconditional housing to solve the homelessness crisis in the city. Every child in the city has to have access to 3 balanced meals a day, well-funded schools with behavioral health specialists that are free. That includes kids who live in, low-income communities who experience the brunt of the trauma. Elders should be given the choice to stay in their homes and not be stuck in retirement, and they should be given resources such as home aids to provide them with what they need to continue to be independent in their golden years. And then finally, young single mothers and foster youth have to have state and community support for as long as they need to finish their development. So yeah, that's probably at the end. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Alia, for your kind of comprehensive look at Black women in these kind of care organizations, and really an overview of what's happening in Cleveland. Let's see, one thing I actually was struck in your work is how it spans the end of the Trump administration and the beginning of the Biden administration. And we won't know until it all works out, but changes in thinking about care as infrastructure, at least nominally. And I was just thinking about how you think care work, whether it be childcare, youth care, which is an interesting facet that doesn't get as much, I think, acknowledgement, elder care, et cetera, how they infrastructurally might relate to Cleveland, or particularly to kind of Black female community?
Yeah, that's so great. And I think that really talking about the Biden administration, one thing that really struck out to me was this building back plan that they have currently was supposed to allocate a large portion of money for people who are serving elders in the home, people who are serving in like people with disabilities or mental or like long-term problems in their homes, because there's a real, like, that's something that I touched on, there's a real disparity between people who have the support and the people who need the support. So I think that the funding that was promised in that bill seems to really be trying to bridge the gap by allowing, income to be provided to family members and other aides who provide support for people in that area. But right now I'm seeing, and Ohio is a red state, but I'm seeing a lot of conservative opposition, particularly to that aspect, because it's being considered not specifically infrastructure related, even though this is essentially the first real legislation that's done anything to pick up the slack in the ways of elder care. Yeah, and I just feel that it's really disappointing how clear those needs seem to be in the community, and how so many lawmakers have even identified, okay, this is an area where our social safety net is lacking, but because our ideas about what it means for something to be considered infrastructure, in the sense that it isn't directly related to some sort of commerce, it's not a bridge that a company can use to drive a truck across, this is something that's directly related to the care of human beings, is really just not given the same weight. It's not considered important in the same way. And that's a really disappointing thing to see, considering how important it is.
And I think this past year and a half has really highlighted the ways that people and community infrastructurally hold us all together. And their collapse kind of leads to wider collapse. So I thank you for all that you've pointed out. And again, Sarah Toole here is coming with wonderful commentary about kind of resources and care and how nationally different it can be. It's different within our nation, but it's also different amongst nations. So we're very thankful for the highlighted work you've done here. And now we're going to move to our final presenter, Enid. And they're going to present on Biggie Minx's books were stolen by feds, but then we got them back. So here's some critical writing about what Biggie wrote. I'm excited. Pardon, Enid, is your volume up? We're having difficulty hearing you. Someone suggested our headphones connected. That might interrupt the sound. It looks like, are you calling in or? Maybe typing. Yeah, maybe the phone can be audio. While you visually present. Can you hear me? Thanks all while we work through this to have Enid's work. Are you chatting or are you dialing in? I think if you can dial into the Zoom number, one of the telephone numbers on the invitation, then.
Can you hear me?
I hear you.
Sorry.
There is a bit of an echo, but we do hear you.
Okay, is it better now?
Oh, yes.
Okay. Okay. Let me do it this way so that I can, I guess, show you guys what's on my screen this way. For right now. Okay, so this is the biography. So BG is a political organizer who's been working in the name of veganism, Black liberation, and various other struggles for over 20 years. They're also a parent to 2 children, a practitioner of hoodoo, a peer mediator, and a theater maker. But my project mostly focuses on a period of time in 2017 when they were leading the anarchist mutual aid disaster relief effort in the city of Houston following Hurricane Harvey. And in particular, they were leading a decentralized network of activists to tear down houses and provide resources to people in Houston. So they have a journal, which is right here, called On Harvey and After, which they created during their time in the field, which was originally intended to be released in 2017 as a zine. But unfortunately, this journal was stolen from their home by the federal police, and they didn't recover it until years later. But this journal talks about their experiences doing on-the-ground direct support in Houston, Texas. And these are some quotes from there. When my presentation is done, I guess I'll try to post this link up into the chat where you can read this book. The other book is called The Conquest of Bread, adapted for the modern lumpen proletariat. And this is another book that was originally released in 2017 with the Anarchist Education Society. However, it was a limited print, and the original copies were also taken by the police during a situation where there was an attack on an info shop by white supremacists. So The Conquest of Bread is more of a political theory book versus the other book, which is more talking about direct experiences on the ground, but it's adapted for the lumpen proletariat. And here's where you can read this book online at blackllamaminx.github.io. Surveillance timeline. Hurricane Harvey happened in 2017. It made landfall in Texas on August 25th, shortly after BG arrived in the city to provide storm relief, where they stayed for a number of months providing the storm relief, and then continued to live in the city afterward in Kashmir Garden, where they set up a permanent house called Cash House, which was intended to be a permanent site for mutual aid disaster relief. In 2019, after ramping surveillance against the house in Kashmir Garden, BG was forced to flee Houston. However, these two books that are the primary subject of my research have gone missing. Based on their experiences, they believe that they were stolen by the same groups that had been surveilling them and threatening them at the time. However, in 2020, in June 2020, BG recovered several boxes from storage lockers across the Pacific Northwest. However, these boxes did not contain the materials that were originally put in them. Instead, some of the papers that they had lost in Texas had somehow made their way across the country and were now back in BG's possession, allowing them to re-release these materials through the Minx distro, which is an anarchist-themed distro. So for the Q&A portion, I've invited BG, the Mink here to present on their own work and answer any kind of questions that you all might have. So I'm gonna turn the questions over to them. I have prepared some questions in case people don't have any, but I would like for people to ask their own questions of BG. So I'm gonna turn the camera around this way and do it like this. I'm going to check in the chat to see if anybody has any questions, but otherwise, I'll eventually just start asking questions, I guess.
Okay, sure.
So from an activist perspective, what do you wish that academics studying race and racism, such as the ones in this room, would know about Black anarchist action in the United States?
I feel like I wish that people would realize that the power is in their own hands and that the steps are they require a lot of effort, but there's only 5 steps in order to stop capitalism harming people in the United States right now. I think that academics studying race should actually be aware that what they're studying is not race. It's not perspective. It's really nothing, honestly. I believe that this is a circle jerk, and to study race and to not be in the field means nothing. To major in debate means very little to me, but to major in praxis and do direct action is very important to me. So I wish that academics would learn how to do direct action and overlap those worlds or leave the institution.
Here's a question from Aaliyah. Is there something that you particularly wish you could have retrieved that was stolen? What was the most important part of the papers to you, and was that part returned?
No, I don't wish that I had more of the pieces of paper versus any of the others. The thing that I wish I had was safety and security, that I hadn't suffered from scarcity and been forced to move in circles around this country when I'm landlocked and unable to go to the continent that I came from. But I wish that I had had better tools and less gaslighting in order to survive this. I wish that more people realized how much surveillance they are under and the history of this, because even this university has a 50-year history of surveilling Black students intentionally. So what we do to destroy the institution seems more important than theorizing the different ways that they have tried to kill us already.
One question that I have, and I know came up a lot when we were in class about this work, was like, what made you decide to sort of link all these works together, the bread book, Harvey and After, and then the work that you're doing right now with the Minx distro? You're usually anonymous when you work, so why did you decide to do this project, basically?
Well, I'm anonymous in regards to not having a social media presence where I am acknowledged as one of the activists of the scene, and but I'm not anonymous in activism because the federal government has seized every bank account that I've had access to, has chased me out of numerous houses, has tried to assassinate me in cars on the road, anywhere that they could. So I don't feel like I am anonymous. I feel like I'm gaslit under surveillance and that there is a paid class of activists and that I would like for that to end, that it should have never started. And then on respect to Lucy Parsons, that I want to release these things because this is the target audience, is me. The bread book for the modern lumpen proletariat, and the bread book as a coloring book, a Harvey journal that is a praxis guide that is not just some autobiographical memoir, to me seems more important to getting to the next step. Because honestly, I don't really want for people to read what I'm producing. I just want people to get to direct action. And if they need the steps of 12 principles of effective direct action, say that you need informed autonomous consent, and then security and secrecy, refusal to comply or be arrested, and diversity of roles and clarity of tactics. And in order for me to work with you, I need you to have that informed autonomous consent. And so I need to explain to you what surveillance. This meeting is being recorded. So I need to explain to you what surveillance is in this context so that you're not left out driving in circles, wasting your life like I've been forced to do for a certain period.
Okay, one more question that I have for you, unless there's any other from people who are here in the room, is how does the work that you're doing, that you're talking about in your Hurricane Harvey journal and that you were doing on the ground in Houston, how does this relate to or contribute to the 5 actions to kill the virus, which are open everywhere, never work again, pay for nothing, free all prisoners, and open hospitals, which are the 5 actions you've been calling for more recently?
I feel like they all relate to each other because late stage capitalism is a disaster. Climate change is a disaster. The blowback culturally of surviving 2020 is that these systems are going to collapse. So if we could figure out in a harm reduction plan, my personal view of harm reduction is that I advocate for my sibling, the earth. I'm not so much worried about humans. I think that our view is entirely too focused on human survival. So to me, harm reduction, keeping the most humans alive, and also preserving the earth for the longest amount of time involves stopping and starting all of these things at once. Opening everywhere is the most important beginning space. There are too many people without houses. There are too many books locked behind doors. What's happened right now to the Africa family with these bones, Mumia Abu Jamal's family, when they bombed Philadelphia in 1985, these children's bones were never put anywhere except for into white people's lockers inside of colleges like this one's lockers. And now they're looking to admit what they did. And we know what they did. They firebombed Black people in the middle of the city for growing gardens. And then they took their children's bones on purpose to stop ritual. And now still Mumia is in prison. So opening everywhere gets rid of all of that. If the vault at that school gets opened up, I bet you we're going to find the bones of some Black people somewhere. So why don't we go ahead and give those back and start going in that reconciliation that comes from knowing where your family is? Because I don't know where the bones of my family are. And I would like that first, because I can't really have a conversation about reform until after I know where the bones of my family. So opening everywhere, paying for nothing, because none of this is, there's no ethical consumption. So why are you paying so much for these things to exploit you? Never working again seems to be a given. We fake general strike all the time. There's a general strike right now in support of Palestine. There's a general strike on coronavirus. There's a general strike from not getting hazard pay last summer. There's a general strike of the teachers. There's 7 or 8 different general strikes happening in this country right now, and not a one of them is doing anything effective enough to stop the industry. Freeing all prisoners is the most important part to me, but opening and occupying space is required before that. Because as much as prisons need open, factories need open, slaughterhouses, none of these buildings need to have locks on them. If anything that I've learned so far in my life is behind a locked gate, is because someone wants to leave there. It is not for personal property protection. It is to hold someone hostage. And so I think we should just go ahead and use the bolt cutter. Opening hospitals, I feel like, is a given. There's too many sick people in this country, too many people with things that we don't even realize make us sick. Like if dental was available, I would have several more friends right now because people die from not having their teeth healthy. So, and I guess what I want you to know is what you already know, and that's that writing papers is only so effective, and how much time you spend focused on that is taken away from something you could be doing to change the world. And if you feel confused about it, to me, it's not true that we have time for joy and action. We have time for discipline, dissolving systems, because there's nothing to be joyful about in a dystopian society, but maybe post-apocalypse, we could actually have some fun.
Well, I want to thank you so much for coming and taking part in this conversation. I also want to thank Tina Post, my advisor for this project, and you as well, Nova, for all the help that you've given, and wish congratulations to all my peers.
Thank you so much, Enid, and wonderful to have such kind of a powerful guest and one who is really putting something on the line by coming to share their thoughts and their wisdom with us. So that we really can't value enough. Thank you, really. You all, I'm so excited we're at this ending moment. There are so many other students who weren't able to join us here, but whose work is incredibly powerful and important and interesting, right? Let's not forget interesting. As we have in our chat here, we want to thank those who weren't here: Nia Morrison, Jaylin Zhang, Jin Yoon, Nia Morrison, Zainab Hassan, Sarah Siddiqui, Gabby Silva, Olivia Berger. And I don't know if Jacqueline has any kind of closing remarks to make, or I don't know if there are other questions, etc. Jacqueline?
Thank you, Nova, for all of your work with the students and with this program for the last 2 years, for being the preceptor. Thank you, everyone, for joining us, and congratulations to the class of 2021. Have a great weekend, everyone.
Goodbye, everyone. Congratulations and good luck.